Well, welcome. Thanks for joining us here, either live or later on the recorded version. Think about normal life, non-lockdown life for a moment. What are you doing? Shopping for the groceries, paying the bills, finishing some important project at work, get the mail, eat, clean up the kitchen, clean up the car, clean up the house. You got to sleep. You've got people to see, things to do, visits to make, more shopping to be done, hobbies to get involved with. We get busy, right? My experience of life is people complain about I got too much to do and too little time to do it. And when we look at this, we say, I probably should, spend a little bit more time on my spirituality, on personal growth. I should perhaps spend some more time on that, but boy, the grandkids get in the way and this gets in the way and I just don't have the time for it. Well, guess what, friends? You're going to live the lockdown dream here, at least for a few more days. And this is perhaps a good time to do some personal growth work. Perhaps that's what we need to be taken away from this extended lockdown, is that maybe we'll have a chance to do some work. Because how many of us have spent time in the last week reading scripture and then just calmly, relaxing, meditating on it and asking yourself, where could I do better in life? What are some conversations and some interactions I've had that really haven't gone, shall we say, at a highest heaven level? Where could I perhaps do a little bit better? As I was thinking about the topic for this week, I came across this reading in John chapter 15, just the first two verses here. It says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes. He prunes that it may bear more fruit. Friends, what I'm going to suggest to you today is that perhaps we are going through a season of pruning. Perhaps we are useful people. Perhaps we are decent people. Perhaps we're like Job and is righteous and is doing basically things right. But you know what? Every employer knows that if you want to get something done, you give it to the person who's the busiest, most competent employee you have. Because they manage to make it all happen. They have a busy schedule, so they work it in. They're efficient. They're on top of it. Versus the person who has little to do says, I'll do it later. Got plenty of time. Plenty of time. The Lord's trying to get perhaps maybe a little bit more out of us. He's saying, you're doing well. I'd like you to do a little bit better. It's time for some pruning. I want you to move up to the next level spiritually. Maybe that's what's going on. So ask yourself, even though you're physically, restricted as far as your movements go these days, are you thinking the same things? Are you spiritually free? Are you experiencing spiritual freedom to think things in a different way, even if you don't have physical freedom? Now, I know many of you watching this have been around the new church for a long time. And you go, we have spiritual freedom. That's what the Lord's Advents were about. There was two of them, and it's all about spiritual freedom. Yes, I have spiritual freedom. Right. You have the opportunity to have spiritual freedom. The Lord has granted us the ability to think freely. But it doesn't take away the responsibility that we all have to be thinking about the right kind of things. The fact that we have this freedom means that we can think about things that relate to heaven. We can think about the deeper truths of life. We can take the new knowledge we have in the second coming and apply it to all the aspects of our life. Generally speaking, greater freedom does mean the ability to do what we wish. But spiritual freedom only comes when we desire the right things. Namely, we've got to get our mind in harmony with what the Lord says is the true order of life. True freedom is the freedom to think, to will, and to do not just anything, but true freedom is the ability to think what is good and true. So, when it gets back to our life, well, what do? We need to kind of sit there and say, well, what have I done in the last, week, 2 weeks, month, whatever? What are the interactions that I have had? And are these of a celestial quality? Are they the third heaven kind of quality interaction? Or are you struggling along, barely making it into the lowest heaven? I mean, that's still heaven, right? It's not so bad. But, when pruning happens, it's because you've got something good and you're trying to make more of it. That's what's going on there. So you had that conversation with a friend, a coworker, family member, and you said things that perhaps were a little harsh. Perhaps you said things that were not very kind. Perhaps you sent off an email to a friend, a family member, whatever, and your words, well, they wouldn't pass the muster of being able to be read in the third heaven, right? They just don't quite belong there. This is the kind of work the Lord's asking us to do with spiritual freedom. Because we get in ruts in our life as far as how we do things, but we also get in ruts in our head as to how we respond to situations. And maybe in this time where perhaps you have a little bit less to do because you're in lockdown, you think, well, maybe I can take some time to reflect on the things that I think, the way I respond to things. Because a lot of times, we think we're free, but it can be really easy to lie to ourselves and say that we're mentally free and I can think whatever I want to think, when we're actually just slaves to an ongoing pattern. Look at your life and think, well, gee, do I always respond the same way in this situation? Should I be doing that, or should I be raising it up a little bit higher? Again, in the Gospel of John, we have a reading from chapter 8. Jesus said to the Jews who believed in him, "If you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." They answered him, "We are Abraham's descendants. We have never been in bondage to anyone. How can you say you will be made free?" I mean, the absurdity of that statement, right? We've never been in bondage to anyone. Clearly they have no concept of history, right? Slaves in Egypt. Okay, yep, they were enslaved there for hundreds of years. The Assyrians came and took over and kind of made them slaves. And the Babylonians came and took them over. And then the Greeks came in and took them over. And the Romans came in and took them over. And they were in charge at that very moment. I mean, that's the denial of their slavery, right? That they're slaves at that very moment. How can you say? How can you say we've never been in bondage to anyone? That's a reflection of us, right? We get to be slaves to certain attitudes, thoughts, and all these things in our mind, how we respond, and we don't even realize we're slaves to it. We don't realize just how much of a quick reaction we have in a situation that we don't slow things down. Maybe we need some pruning every now and again. Maybe we need some pruning to slow down, to pause, and go, all right, I got a week here, perhaps, maybe more, where I can slow down and just think about how I'm responding in different situations. Am I being too controlling of other people? Am I asking too much of other people? What is it that I'm doing that I could be doing a little bit better? 15 years ago, I think about my own self, and I would have been the same way as those Jews saying, "What do you mean I'm a slave? I'm not a slave, I got a good job, I've got a wife, I've got enough money to go on a decent holiday, I've got all the cars that I really want." I was a slave. I didn't even know it. And that's what scares me about my life now. It's like, I think I'm pretty free right now. Like, I am in a foreign country. Am I a disposed, I don't know. But that's kind of the problem we run into is we think we're free when we're really not. It's the problem the children of Israel run into is that if you look at their history, They come out of slavery into Egypt, and they're still the same people. Right? Isn't that the reality? We have two stories we could choose to follow in our life at this moment. We could choose to be like the children of Israel, come out of Egypt, and then they spend 40 years in the desert trying to find freedom, worshiping golden calves. And instead of trying to be God's chosen people, they were just really what they were trying to do was to be the Egyptians. Instead of being those enslaved, they were trying to be the taskmasters. That was really what they were trying to do, which is still slavery. They're still in the same system. Or we could be following the Joseph story. Someone who was sold into slavery, falsely accused, imprisoned, left in prison to rot. All his skills just kind of, thrown away. But each step along the way, Joseph did what was right. And each step along the way, he raised his spirituality. He became a better person, not harboring resentments, not trying to be anything other than what the Lord told him to be, and using his skills in service to others. All along the way, he's growing even though he's imprisoned. And when he finally gets his moment of freedom, where does he go? Straight to the top. That's our choice, right? We can be Joseph. We can be the children of Israel wandering through the desert. And I know some people will say, oh, but it takes time to become this stuff. It takes time. Yeah, it was a 3-day journey. It was a 3-day journey from Egypt to the Holy Land. 3 days. And we take a long time to do it, but it was just 3 days. And the funny thing is I found this story about change that can happen. And this guy, he is a falcon trainer. All right? This young man captured a wild hawk and in 3 days had converted it into an obedient falcon. The sound of a whistle, the bird would fly from its perch, land on the guy's arm, take food that was offered to it, and on command return to its roost. When it was outdoors, it was free to escape, but the hawk made no attempt to do so or return to its natural home. This creature in 3 days was transformed to abandon its natural instinct, its normal behavior, its ancestry, and submit to a new way of life. I know we were higher up on the food chain than animals. We're higher up on the intellectual chain than a falcon. But it's amazing the amount of change that can happen in a short time. That's the kind of framework we need to get our mindsets in if we're going to make these kind of changes. Because freedom is all about love. Take a look at this reading from New Jerusalem and its heavenly doctrine. It's in your order of service. All freedom is of love. For what a person loves, this he does freely. Hence, all freedom is of the will. For what a person loves, this he also wills. And because love and the will make the life of the person, so also does freedom. From these things it may appear what freedom is, namely it is that which is of the love and of the will, and thence of the life each. Hence it is that when a person does from freedom, appears to him as if from his own self. To do evil from freedom appears as freedom, but it is slavery, because that freedom is from the love of self and from the love of the world, and those loves are from hell. Such freedom is actually turned into slavery after death. But to do good from freedom is freedom itself, because it is from love to the Lord and from love towards the neighbor, and these loves are from heaven. This freedom remains also after death, and then becomes freedom indeed. For the man who has been in such freedom becomes in heaven like a son of the house of his father. This the Lord teaches. Everyone that sins is a servant of sin, and the servant abides not in the house forever, but the Son abides forever. If the Son shall have made you free, you shall be truly free. So in order for us to be free, we have to want it. We have to cultivate the loves of freedom. We have to say, I don't want to be like this person anymore. I want to be like this. That's the problem. that the children of Israel faced in the desert. They wanted to be Egyptians. They didn't want to be the chosen people of the Lord, at least not for a while. That's the same thing that we encounter right now. Can we decide that, you know what, I'd like to be a little bit better? And I'd like to finish off this service here with reading you the story that I found. And I think I've told parts of this story before on one of our classes over the years. But this is a story about a woman, and she goes to a meditation retreat weekend. And in this process, they're asked to, when they're asked to meditate, they got to close down their eyes and their mind, and just they create this image of a black box. And the leader of the meditation says, I want you to take all your problems, all your worries, all your day-to-day stuff, and I want you to put it in this imaginary box that's sealed so tight that nothing can come in or out of it. And the idea is to put all your cares and worries of the day aside. Put it in the black box. Your problems will be there when we're done. But for now, focus on the meditation. And this is what she writes. She says, for reasons unknown to me, during my meditation, I was suddenly in a black box. A void of total blackness. It was like being juggled from one extreme to the other. I started off with total sensation, but now I'm in a lack of sensation. Frustration began to invade me, for I found it was somewhat difficult finding a way out of this vast blackness. In my next session, I began to experience the blackness again, and that's when I started to worry. At our next meal, I mentioned what was occurring to our group leader, hoping that she might offer a solution. During our discussion, my problem was overheard by a few men at the table who had apparently been listening in. Later, one of them took me aside to explain. He told me that a few of the men in our group had found themselves fantasizing about me during their own meditation experiences, hence all the sexual thought vibrations I was picking up. He also told me that, having a hard time dealing with their sexual attraction, they were putting me in their black boxes to leave their problems behind before embarking onto their own meditation consciousness sessions. They had all put me in the black box void that I was experiencing so that I wouldn't distract them. At first, I was really annoyed at this. How dare they influence my experiences? How dare their sexual energy have that much control over me? I still marvel at how powerful thoughts are, and these three men's directed at me was overwhelming. At the same time, I felt somewhat naive for not having picked up the signs earlier, but I was much too wrapped up in how the workshop was changing me to fully get into what others were thinking. But this was not the end. I transformed my being annoyed at being thought of as a sex object, even if only in their minds, and started wondering what growth could be gained from this experience. It started me thinking along other lines, and what was to follow would change the course of my life. Now notice this, right? This is a big deal. This woman has gone to the trouble of having a meditation retreat. These guys are mucking it up for her experience. She's not experiencing what she's supposed to. And what is she saying? How can I see this differently? How can I see this differently? It happened simply because I asked divine forces, in all sincerity, for me to be able to experience spiritual love. I asked not for me to be the recipient of it, but that I might learn how to give it to others to my fullest ability. My request was granted. It was an experience that was beyond words, for love, total and absolute, surrounded me more and more strongly than can be earthly experienced or imagined. The more I gave, the greater I received, and I didn't want to let go. I left this meditation experience feeling transformed. I kept saying, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, over and over and over again for all that it was, and it changed me. It was only a short time later than I was at work, and for some strange reason, I was drawn to talk to a coworker. He was one of the few people at the office that I didn't know very well, and in fact, I'd never really had a chance to talk to him. He was a young, good-looking man, but for some reason, we seemed to be avoiding each other. But all at once, I just knew that I was supposed to get to know him. It turns out he'd had a similar experience, asking for spiritual love. And now we've been together for 2 years, growing and loving. She had that experience because she changed the way she responded to a negative situation. She says, okay, this isn't working. How can I experience this love so that I can give it on, even though I'm not receiving it right now? The Lord speaks to us in many different ways. He speaks to us sometimes through our eyes and our ears, through parables, through all the different treasure stories in His Word, through little bits of grains of truth dropped in our laps, through temptations, and through difficult times that includes lockdowns. Just with the Pharisees, our answers that we need are right there, but we have to be asking the right questions. Ask for the truth. Ask for experiencing love. Accept the fact that perhaps right now we're being pruned, that we're going through a difficult time, and that we can say to the Lord, okay, I accept where I am right now. I'm being pruned. I feel like I'm being taken back a few steps, but the Lord's saying, this is an opportunity for you to experience something better. Are you asking for that instead of trying to be an Egyptian? That's the challenge for us right now. And I bet you're up for it. Just make sure you take the time during the next week or two to use some time to stop, to reflect, and try to learn what you can out of this pruning experience. Amen.